I'm glad you found community. For those of us who kind of went on way back when, we never found community. We were basically alone trying to make it. And so I am glad that at least you are not alone, and that you have reached out and you found people, and that in fact you took the lemons that the pandemic had given you and you made lemonade. And so now you have a whole bunch of other people that you can hang out with, that you can plot with, that you can co-conspire with, and create wonderful things. And I think that that is really a tribute. But I love the comment that you made about culture keeps people. Culture can also force people out, but culture is what keeps people. And that's really, it's good that we're having this conversation because the program that I told you about, Sea Change, STEM Equity Achievement, change, um, it's about culture change. It's about transformation, institutional transformation. You shouldn't have to create these little bubbles that you can live in, or try to find a few other people you can invite into that space. It needs to be that you can move easily through that space, through the entire space, and be able to find and claim your own space within that. So let's talk for just a second though about this whole question of finding people. All right. The reason I ask this is almost anybody that I talk to who has problems diversifying their faculty, first thing that they often say is, we can't find anyone. And I tend to follow that up with, where have you looked? And what I get is probably what I expected to get. They look within their own networks. They look within a handful of institutions where all the best people go. They look to their friends. They look at the applications that come in. And so they end up with sorts, not searches. They sort through those people who have basically had the courage to apply, or the arrogance to apply. And in so many cases, I find that we as women of color, we tend to be a lot more circumspect in those cases. Do we want to go where we're not going to be accepted? Are welcoming vibes being sent out from that institution? Who's there already? I mean, so I think that there's a lot that goes into that. Would you kind of comment on some of that?
Yeah, I really think you hit the nail on the head. Exactly. These are the conversations that we continue to have. And, you've been having these conversations for such a long time, and we're still having the same conversations, where the people are out there, right? And now we have the proof. We look in these Black and X groups alone. Look at the Intersection Science Fellow Symposium. Look at Next Gen Symposium. The people are out there, and it's just, where are you looking? If you're going to keep looking in the same pool, you're going to keep finding the same people. But really, we are there, and it's just looking in the right places. That's one of the great things about the symposium, as I mentioned, is that there's these wonderful scientists, and hello, here they are. They're on a stage now. These are wonderful scientists, most of which who are from underrepresented backgrounds, all of which are excellent scientists, all of which do excellent diversity work. And they still are putting out the numbers, right? They're still putting out the papers. We were able to find these incredible fellows. The first year we had almost 400 applications, and we had thrown this together, and we got 400 people to apply, all who did diversity work to a certain extent. And the people who really were doing the diversity work, it was way past the 26 original fellows. So, the people are out there, which is really great to see and to know.
But to a certain extent, what the symposium did was it gave people out there a point of nucleation. that they could aggregate around that point, and that they could basically, they had some place to come in. One of the things that I want to ask you about, because the this whole question about how many people are out there, what are they doing? I have no doubt that they are wonderful, because when you have had to manage your science at the same time that you are managing your life and managing your place in a larger society that doesn't necessarily value you, you come out with a whole range of skills that other people just do not have. And I to what extent should should people be looking for this resilience, this purposefulness, this kind of energy, this commitment, this different way of thinking and organizing one's lived experience?
I mean, diversity is what drives change. Not only diversity of what we look like, but also diversity of thought. This is what we really need to be bringing forward. The truth is, science has never worked the way you propose it, right? My thesis proposal ended up being the same type of cancer, but nothing else stayed the same. And we're supposed to adjust as we go, as we get more information. And right now, I feel like we've been using the same information, right? That people of color just there aren't that many. And if they are there, they just aren't as good. What are we doing with that? Why are we keeping that same information? Why aren't we adjusting as we're getting more information in, right? So it's something that I didn't really appreciate, though, until I was well into my graduate work. I had decided that I was suddenly not that intelligent. But the truth is, like, I had been going through a lot of trauma in my life. Not only that, but I was also expected to fail. I had colleagues, people in my cohort saying it. I had faculty saying it. And, it does get to you when you think about how often it's said to you that because of what I look like, and that's it. It's nothing else except for what I look like. I'm just not going to be as good as the next.
I think that that's the part that we need for each individual to understand. But so, it's not just that individual needs to understand, but the people around them need to understand. And I think that we have we're looking at situations, for example, where cases are coming to the Supreme Court around the issue of race attentiveness within admissions and what have you within higher education. And the court is looking at whether or not this other person was disadvantaged by your coming, and not really understanding that the kind of narrow measures of merit that often get pulled up at the time to make comparisons are inappropriate. They're inappropriate because they don't really measure what we value in science, which is the creativity, the resilience, the persistence, the lived experiences that people are bringing into the space.
I mean, aren't we all the proof of that? I'm the proof of that. That despite everything I've been through, I'm the child of an immigrant. I was raised by a single mom. I grew up in the hood. Like, there's all these things. Despite that, everything I've been through, I'm one of these incredible scholars, along with all these other incredible scholars. And you know what's crazy? And you mentioned the resilience bit. Too often, we have the same lived experience, the same types of trauma, which is heart-wrenching. It really is heart-wrenching, but it kind of shows you that it's not an anomaly either. It's not just like I happen to do well. It goes beyond that, and it transcends to other people. But speaking, of like this comparison game that happens, one of the things I tweeted a few months ago on my F32 comments. And, I got a lot of comments, a lot of really great feedback, a lot of constructive feedback. And there were some flaws in the science, which were really, the feedback was so wonderful. And I think that was, if you look at that alone, I was really happy with that part, because I was like, this is great. I can only make this better. But one comment that stood out to me was about my grades, and that I didn't have great grades as a first year graduate student. Now, I didn't disclose this when I applied, but I did put this in the tweet. I was stalked during my first year as a graduate student. And I didn't have the emotional capacity, or, I was in this traumatic moment of my life that I didn't process that this was happening to me. And I sort of just thought that I was dumber. But, if I think about it and I take a step back, I didn't sleep for an entire month. So no, I didn't do as well. But here I am, I'm 7 years out of my first year of graduate school. I have a lot of publications. I have a lot of work in the diversity space. I have, I do not only work in my field, I also do so many collaborations, and I have these incredible letters of recommendation. And the person is knocking me down because of grades from 7 years ago. And now, would they do that to a counterpart who wasn't a woman of color? This is the stuff that makes you really think.
Did anybody ever ask you, were there things going on in your life that you feel might have affected your performance?
I will admit, when I applied to graduate school, I got that question. And obviously that worked out. That was because I had one semester, and I'll remind you, I was working 3 and 4 jobs every semester. So that wasn't really taken into account. But there was one semester where one of my best friends was diagnosed with cancer. So I was dealing with that. And so it was asked and it was taken into account. And thankfully I did get into graduate school. But to be honest, since then, no one has asked.
That was the first thing that basically, when you see performance items that look different at different points, I seldom tend to look at where people started. You start where you start. I look at where people ended. Okay, and so that's the reason I asked you. Did no one ever ask you why it looks so different on the front end than on the rest of it?
Yeah, and to me, that's exactly what does the stuff that occurred to me at this front end, what does that have to do with the number of publications that I have now? What does it have to do with the network that I have and the diversity and inclusion work that I'm doing, that it's going to make academia better? And it's going to diversify academia. And with this diversity, you're going to have diversity of thought, and your science is just going to skyrocket. So why are we focusing on something such as grades? Why is it even something that's mentioned?
Yeah, well, we tend to talk about this a lot. A friend of mine many years ago, Lauren Resnick, talked about the fact that we tend to value what we can measure rather than measure what we value. And when you're going into graduate school, what you got in freshman chemistry or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Even your first year graduate work, because in every transition, it is basically very, very difficult when you're managing lots of things at once. It's not where you start, it's where you end. It's where did the experience that you received, how did that impact you? And if the thing that we value, the thing that we really want to focus on in terms of your potential as a scholar is your research, then why are you looking over here at your grades? Are you looking for a way to exclude, or are you looking for a way to include? And I find that within the STEM fields, in too many cases, there is a kind of an attitude of, there's too many people here, we got to weed some of them out. Not cultivate them in, not nurture them in, but weed them out. And that doesn't quite make sense to me.
Yeah, and to kind of go off of that a little bit further is one of the conversations that we often have amongst postdocs is that there's this culture where you need to have these CNS, or, these cell nature science papers. And that's interesting to me because I came from a state university of New York, right? And I loved it. I loved my experience there. But the resources I had in this lab that was built in the 70s, and probably to this day still looks exactly the same, are not the same as the resources I have at Yale now. And it's a world of difference. So I think about the people who went to undergraduate at these higher institutions that weren't necessarily liberal arts schools and the access that they had. And why is it that we're looking specifically for these papers when we all know this, right? It's about money. It's about access. So why are we not looking at specifically at the science? Because science will speak for itself, not the title of the journal. To be honest, it's just another form of gatekeeping that we continue to have.
Yes. Yes. And there is this subtle expectation of who ought to be in and who probably should be out. But I'm sure you surprise people, Aileen, when you show up. I mean, I know. I mean, the thing is, I know of cases of where, like women used to use only their initials in their publications because they didn't want to give any cues that somebody could pick up on and use to exclude them.
I have a colleague right now who still does that, and she's finishing her postdoc now, and she's going to be transitioning soon to a faculty position. And as she was, applying and thinking about all of this, she mentioned to me that, she was looking at her publication history, and she was like, in the beginning of her career, she was advised to do that because she's a woman of color. We are discriminated against based solely on our names. And if we're women, tough luck. And if you're a woman of color, forget about it, right? And honestly, it's ridiculous to me that we have to change and we have to hide who we are for people just to accept us. And I refuse to do that. I'm going to just keep showing up as me. And if you love me, you love me. And if you don't, then next person's going to love me. So I know who I am and I know my value. And that's something that I'm working on because I know my value. I'm working on really showing it as well. And that's something that's, I think, going to be ever evolving. And that's one thing that I love my job. And one of the reasons I love my job is my boss. My boss really values me as I am. I showed up to my interview with an afro, and I was like, I'm not going to go with my hair straightened. I'm going to go with my afro, and he has to accept me as I am. And he didn't even think twice. I think about a year later, I told him I was Latina. He's like, oh, I didn't know. He's like, I just knew you were a great scientist. So that was like such a wonderful thing to really hear him saying. He's a white male. I do have my flaws, and I do have those insecurities, but he's been doing such a great job just mentoring me. He tells me to keep working on these things. You have to stop. You have to stop being so blatantly honest about every little mistake that you make. You don't have to do that. You also do really great things that aren't mistakes, and you should talk about those things as well. And it's really this great mentorship that has really just elevated my experience as a postdoc. And I think mentors can really make or break an experience. And I've been very fortunate to have mostly incredible mentors. And I'm so thankful for David and the time and effort he puts into all of his trainees to really uplift them as they need.
But that statement that you just made, that's a statement that every person who would mentor someone like you needs to hear. What you need in order to be your best self is basically reassurance that the self that you think is the self that they value. And I think that is something that we really need to hammer home to those people who would be mentors out there. And I think that to a certain extent, they are unbelieving that you would have any doubt. The really good mentors are wondering, oh, why is this person doubting herself, or himself? And just really often don't understand the kind of trauma that you've been through to get to where you are. I think that's why it's important that you share your story.
Yeah, and I agree with that. As I mentioned earlier, I went to community college and I did this Bridges program. My mentor was Dr. Scrivenek, who's also the director to this day of this program. And I actually return to that program every single year. And anytime he asks me to do anything, I show up because he's still such a great mentor to me. And I like to speak to these students who are in the place that I was back in 2006, I guess 2007. And, I want them to hear it from me that there's a lot of naysayers out there. And there are a lot of people who didn't think I was going to make it, and now that I'm older, I realize that the reason that they thought that wasn't because of anything I did. It wasn't any fault of my own. It was because I was a woman. And more importantly, it's because I was a woman of color.
Doing well is the best revenge.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's something that I had an experience as a master's student, which wasn't really wonderful. And I won't go into too many details on it. But what's interesting is when I defended my thesis, my mom, who is my number one supporter, she said to me, she said, you should send that person your thesis. Because the truth is that person actually tried to stop me from getting into graduate school. And the truth is that not only do we have people who are, maybe subconsciously trying to stop you, who are just assuming sort of subconsciously that they're like, oh, this person just can't be good enough. But there's also people who are going to be actively trying to stop you from moving forward. Yeah. And, what that judgment was based on was what the person saw and not who I was. And, they just decided I wasn't good enough.
And I think that in some cases, it really does fly in the face of their own expectations. But in other cases, it may be the issue of you're too good for what you went through to be where you are. In the sense of you are there in spite of everything they did. Would that person be there even though they had all of the advantages and privileges? So celebrate yourself.